The world has witnessed a tale of two countries with vastly different understandings of what it means to uphold an international agreement. 1 week later, it is clear that only one side, one country, is keeping its word. And for anyone who wants to create gray areas out of black or find in the fine print crude ways to justify crude actions, let's get real. The Geneva Agreement is not open to interpretation. It is not vague. It is not subjective. It is not optional.
Okay, again, we look at another difficult video to do, which follows this lockdown scenario where we venture into these task forces that were put together in some sort of convoluted command where the command keeps telling its subordinates that they are the command. And we can see this circle jerk of the military following the policy, but the policy is requesting the military, but the military is already embedded in the policy. So we're going to follow this around and build up a tree of that responsibility so that you can start to see this network of lies that you've been sold since 2018. So we're going to look at how this first came about, and we're going to look at you shall know them by their rainbows. We're going to look at how that rainbow impacted you, where it came from, and the actual crimes that it's committed.
3 Chinese warships have asked to dock in Sydney Harbour in a move that's seen as Beijing flexing its military muscle. According to The Australian, the vessels will dock at Garden Island after requesting safe harbour.
Decisions made in that context that doesn't undermine those things, and that's positive.
This was a program of a reciprocal visit. They were returning from counter drug trafficking operations in the Middle East, and that is a further demonstration of the relationship that we have, and this had been in train for some time. So it may have been a surprise to others, but it certainly wasn't a surprise to the government. I think we've got to be careful not to see what are ongoing and upgrading relationships here for Australia and the Pacific through those binary terms of the United States and China. They have their interests in the region, as do others, but our relationship with the Solomon Islands, our relationship with the Pacific transcends all of that.
A series of bonds issued by the Qing government a century ago are once again questioning the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist regime that is now in a difficult dilemma it cannot get out of. The market value of the bonds is worth $1.6 trillion, and if the CCP wants to prove itself to be the legitimate government of China, then it has to pay back these bonds. Then it must recognize that the Republic of China, Taiwan, is the legitimate government of China. In 1911, the Hukuang Railway Bond was issued by the Qing dynasty to the United States, Britain, France, and Germany to raise funds for the construction of the Hukuang Railways that run from Hunan to Guangzhou. The total amount was £6.5 million with an annual interest rate of 5%. The bond was due in 40 years, which was in 1951. After the Qing dynasty was overthrown, the Republic of China recognized the inheritance of the Hukuang Railway Bond and repaid part of the interest to the United States. The payments of interests were stopped in 1938 due to the outbreak of the anti-Japanese War. However, when the People's Republic of China subverted the Republic of China in 1949, the PRC refused to recognize the debt.
When I came to China in 1979, 45 years ago, and I compare it with today, I have to say this journey of economic development was so impressive. Let's just look at some figures. GDP in 79 was 100 times lower compared to what it is, more than 100 times. Trade volume was far more than 100 times smaller than today. And I could go on. I mean, China at that time was clearly a very underdeveloped country. Today it has taken the leadership in many technologies.
So again, we look at this line of command and we start to look at a few more evidences that link this command together somewhere. So again, we switch over to a microphone so that we can continue looking at what we started to look at in the video command. Right, the two videos that I would suggest that you watch are treason, demonstrating very clearly that Albanese has committed acts going against the very constitution, and command, demonstrating that these commanders have been gaslighting you, but now we start to look at who they've been doing it on behalf of. Are they just following orders, or are they in cahoots with this decision making?
Good morning. 3 Chinese warships have arrived in Sydney Harbour this morning, docking at the Garden Island Navy base for a 4-day stopover. We go live now to Lizzie Pearl, who's outside the Navy base. Lizzie, it's an interesting show of force.
It certainly is, MB. Good morning to you. It's just after 8 o'clock this morning when these Chinese warships started making their way through the Sydney Heads and into Sydney Harbour. There's 3 Chinese warships. There's a frigate, an auxiliary replenishment ship, as well as an amphibious vessel. And they were guided into place by tugboats and Australian military helicopters to where they are now, docked behind me at the Garden Island Navy base.
So first up, we'll look at this World Economic Forum and some activities from the past compared to those similar activities in the present. We can correlate those activities to these international rules and the United Nations. So we start to look at the money men, and we look at a few actions that have taken place with those money men before we go back to looking at how this command followed through the ADF, federal government, into the states, into the policy of the states, while no one talks about the Governor-General or the governors of state that are supposed to be in a line of authority under the blessing of Almighty God.
And why can't you afford to buy food today? Because of money laundering. Quite simply, money laundering. Money laundering has destroyed every facet of your life, from paying your rent to the increase in property tax to cities going broke and cities turning into empty shells. And we've been warning you guys about this, I don't know how long now. Literally, I don't know how.
Thank you for coming here today. Given the increase of 19 cases in the recent days, I thought it'd be timely that we should give you an update of Defence's assistance to the states and territories. As of this afternoon, about 1,500 Defence personnel are deployed as part of Operation COVID-19 Assist.
So we look at some events that have already passed us, and we see them in the news record, and it can be demonstrated by a change in the events around you and this pre-lockdown and post-lockdown talk that they all speak. But we can see by their actions that certain things have taken place, and this will lead us into the changes of the emergency services onto the battlefront front lines. So a vessel enters through the Heads into Sydney Harbour and then travels its way like the ferry would around that headland into the city at the Harbour Bridge. And on the way in through Cremorne Point, most people wouldn't realise that there stands a stone pillar. And this is on the headland as you turn the corner into the Garden Point area before the Harbour Bridge. As you pull into Garden Point, on the right-hand side is Kirribilli House and Admiralty House. This pillar forms a biblical foundation wherein internationally agreed upon that to pass over that pillar unannounced would be an act of war. It is inevitable that any ship that passes that pillar is going to pass Garden Island and Admiralty House on the other side of the harbour. We see financial interests in economic forums. We see connections to Gough Whitlam, Nixon and China. We see changes to the Great Seal of the Commonwealth of Australia into this newly formed Great Seal of Australia, aka administration. And in 2018-2019, we see a close down of what is technically the Crown in the States. This begins with the shutdown of these emergency services, but we can see by the media here that it is actually the ADF that is mocked because it is unable to perform when it was actually the duties of the police, the fire and ambulance within the state of New South Wales to go into that recovery mode. Instead of doing that, police started fining people for travelling around Lismore trying to clear up the flood damage. The ADF took its time to arrive, and residents sought to get their own help because what they realised was that no one from the state or the federal government was helping them because they were in fact using this event to dismantle what was the state's emergency services and put the ADF into some sort of command role that still exists within the police force to this day. We can see that by these fundraising events for first responders that are now on the front line in what could be considered a war. We will have a look later at the words of the Treasurer, Peter Dutton, and the Reserve Bank in relation to what could be considered something as a debt repayment within this international system of events that we can see going on around us. A lot more in depth than we can go into all in one video. So your brain should correlate a lot of the things that you've been shown here that lead to what we're going to look at in relation to this command and these events that have occurred in relation to these rules of administration we call the Hague and Geneva Conventions. Now, we heard from John Kerry at the very beginning of the video, and that's from the United States point of view pushing out. So at the same point therein, it could be taken pushing in, right? We could then take that as to mean any country in the same circumstances because, hey, dirty house. Australia has a dirty house. It doesn't follow its treaties, does it? So it has a dirty house. And therefore it demonstrates to all the other houses that has a dirty house. And they all see it. They totally all see it. So now we go into this command and we look more into the voices of those in that command and respond like we already have, to those voices.
Yeah, Aaron, I think the key determination between conscription and national service needs to be made. Conscription is an outdated policy that can only be applied in wartime. You could imagine, and I know the professors at Curtin University trying to get any of his students to compulsorily be going overseas to fight in combat. It doesn't work, and what it does, it introduces a culture into a fighting force that actually causes more casualties, more injuries, and detracts from capability.
This is wherein the problem begins, in the glass ceiling of academia, in these ignorant people that might just be completely unaware of the circumstances on the table that surround them after 100 years of being in this rules of administration. We see the coin that demonstrates 2018, 1918 to 2018, and then something turns very quickly to a pre-lockdown event, turning into a post-lockdown event where some sort of power is being pushed out of play while some other power moves into father's house. And we can see that father's children are literally ignorant of what is going on around them.
That we should give you an update of Defence's assistance to the states and territories. As of this afternoon, about 1,500 Defence personnel are deployed as part of Operation COVID-19 Assist. This is up from about 700 people from 2 weeks ago. There has been a rapid increase in Defence support in the recent days due to this increase in COVID-19 cases, and will likely increase as the time goes ahead. Some of our new tasks include, in New South Wales, we have approximately 500 personnel supporting the New South Wales Police at border control points. These personnel are currently located in 29 different locations. In South Australia, we have 60 personnel currently supporting South Australia Police with their border control points along the Victoria-South Australia border. In Victoria, we have about 160 ADF personnel who are supporting testing sites across Melbourne. We also have about 100 personnel currently supporting Victorian Police with their Metropolitan Police Control checkpoints. And today I've approved an increase of 75 personnel for that task, bringing it to a total of 175 personnel. We also have a number of ADF personnel assisting Victorian authorities with their planning, in particular the Victorian Police, the State Control Centre at Emergency Management Victoria, and the Department of Health and Human Services. We've also recommenced our support to the Victorian Police Assistance Line in Ballarat. And over the weekend, the Victorian Government accepted an offer of an additional 1,000 ADF personnel. We are currently working very closely with the Victorian Government and their authorities to finalise the arrangements for the deployment of these 1,000 personnel, including trying to determine exactly what support that the ADF would be best suited to provide. While this detailed planning is occurring with the Victorian authorities, we are also working to ensure our personnel are available to deploy quickly once the specific requests are known. The ADF has built strong partnerships with the state and territories through Operation Bushfire Assist and now Operation COVID-19. This year, perhaps more than any other, the ADF has proved it can provide rapid and scalable assistance in support of lead agencies so they can focus on their frontline responsibilities.
Battlefront. Frontline. So we have this failure of command. A failure of command in the New South Wales Governor's Office. a failure of command into the emergency services of a particular crown, perhaps. A failure of command, therefore, bringing on the front line of the battlefield, where the front line responders have to go and pick up what from that battlefield. So we start to see very clearly that they have installed a line of command directly into the states, overruling the governor of state. They've put a puppet governor general in that really doesn't know anything about what's going on around her. And the command is being driven very clearly after a change of the rules of administration under the Hague Conventions, at which we discuss all of this command. So we get this layout of command here. I have given, I have given, I have given, at the request of course. So who's at the top of this tree here in command responsibility here? Command responsibility coming out of the Australian Defence Force into the command structures of the police on behalf of something that came into that Defence Force after it passed through the Pillar of Peace. These are the real questions that everyone should be asking when we got sold a story about tomorrow when the war began. What happens if that tomorrow was yesterday and today you're on a battlefield and the front lines are in front of you and you're all responding to the actions on those lines? At some point, those lines spread apart to divide into no man's land. And that becomes a communist problem in your once free country that has been crippled by a federal and state government using its policy over the jurisdictions of God and his judicial arm. This is where one could say that judicial arm has a mighty power to flex. If you look at the Brereton report and things of that nature, especially when there are rules of engagement on the table at which parties are in adherence to. It can't go one way and not the other, given that a dirty house could be called for failing to uphold what one is obligated to on this international stage, which might include the acknowledgement of who signed what under what seal at what time, giving a credence to some sort of debt structure that might be in fact fraud at its core. Given that there has been major war crimes taking place across an international world, where certain players that are aiding and abetting others to commit crimes as well, one could say the scope of this matter is kind of large, given that you look at what is actually going on around you.
It is a privilege for our personnel to be able to serve their local communities. I'm happy to take a few questions.
So, Major General Paul, I'd like to ask a question. I'm not the media that's already got the prearranged questions, but I'd like to ask you a question today. How do you actually feel after you just went through all of that and look back and think, what have I done to my country? Whose command did I follow, given that I'm a Major General in this matter and I'm obligated to those rules of engagement like the Brereton report, equally as much so on Australian soil? So the irony is not lost here when we have Senator Linda Reynolds, former coalition, because now she's obviously not in command, or is she still in command? The responsibility of command was made back in 2019. So saying that the ADF needs more transparency because of the Brereton report, when she's the responsible party here for the expansion of the ADF into the states through the former fire and flood assistance packages, which got expanded into the 19 packages after they shut down the emergency services branches and turned them into first responders. So the irony here is not lost when you have, within this same article, it's quite interesting to say that Peter Dutton has words to speak at the bottom of this article in relation to Afghanistan. I think it's difficult to maintain an argument that if somebody is alleged to have committed an offence in Afghanistan, that somebody of a higher rank who wasn't there, didn't know about the incident, that they should lose their medal because of the chain of command, Dutton said. So we can see here that this chain of command and command responsibility is being challenged and manipulated and changed. And here we have Dutton saying that they should escape the responsibility for the actions of their subordinates out in the field. Well, that would now apply to every police officer in a line of command into these command centres on that front line as one of those frontline responders. Are you all working for the Red Cross in your little ambulances, or are you working for the people in your capacity under oath?
Well, look, I just think a couple of points. The government can't be blaming the Reserve Bank Governor. You can't be at war with the Reserve Bank Governor because the Reserve Bank Governor can only respond to decisions of the government of the day. The Reserve Bank Governor is independent and she deserves to be respected, and the abuse that she's received from Jim Chalmers just shows what a shambles this government is. The Cabinet is leaking against the Prime Minister. People now in senior positions, Tony Burke, Tanya Plibersek, Bill Shorten, Jim Chalmers, are pitching themselves against the Prime Minister. So the dysfunction that we saw in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years is now being evidenced within the Albanese government. So it is clear the wheels are falling off the Albanese government. When you get these sort of cabinet leaks, when you get the dysfunction that we've seen, the abuse of the Reserve Bank Governor, the Prime Minister trying to blame ASIO for the missteps of Minister Giles at the time and now Minister Burke, it's a debacle. But the Australian public just want to know that there's something out there for them and that there's some hope on the horizon. And economic figures that we're seeing out of this government at the moment, that makes people feel, quite anxious about the future. And I get that. I understand.
And yes, that is a real Victorian Police accidental live stream that was started and then ended abruptly. But we have some interesting words. Some interesting choice of words there. And then those words follow through. Because what is this reserve there for in the first place under the RBA Act of 1959? Would that precede some Currency Act 1965? Would that follow some 1947 International Monetary Fund's rehabilitation offering? Would that have something to do with a railway? Would that have something to do with railway men? Remember that little game from a long time ago? I wish it was still around. Railroad Tycoon. Woot woot. So who's the tycoon here?
Without government spending, without growth in government spending, there'd be no growth in our economy at all. That is primarily health spending. This vindicates the approach that we took in the budget, and it frankly torpedoes a lot of the free advice that we got at budget time to cut harder and harsher.
Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock and her predecessor Philip Lowe have been raising interest rates to try and reduce the level of spending in the economy to bring down inflation. She was put on the spot this week.
The opposition leader has said today that you and the Treasurer are at war. Are you?
To ring the bell. He's doing his job and I'm doing mine. I wouldn't use those sorts of words.
So this Reserve Bank is an independent body and she's doing her job and the Treasurer of your Commonwealth is doing his. So there's some sort of agreement there under the table to borrow money from this lady, at which she's laughing off the fact that we're at war in this debt cycle game that we all keep playing. Ha 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 ha. I wouldn't use such strong words. So who's manipulating the stage then? We've lost this whole ideal of a country to have it replaced by the ideologies of minority men. Does that bring on some sort of minority report? Report to the minority about the majority that are in their little prisons, picking up their phones and being sucked into a world that isn't theirs? That's an interesting thought there. Ready, Player One? Ready to be indoctrinated into a world of you'll own nothing and you'll rent it off these minority men that hide behind your constitution as stakeholders because your military men are too weak-minded to stand up to what is a war crime. A war crime. Yeah, and this is the reality that was put on the table that has caused all of them to kerfuffle for years. And now all it is a matter of watching the witches gather around the cauldron and cackle and fly around thinking they can beat the system when they can't. They already broke the rules. They have a dirty house. A dirty house cannot stand. Matthew 6:24, for you will love the one or hate the other. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?
The economy can't function on intermittent power. We need 24/7 power or our hospitals don't work. There's been a threefold increase in manufacturing business closures in this country over the last 2 years. Why has that happened on the Prime Minister's watch? Because he doesn't have a clue what he's doing economically. And when the Reserve Bank Governor gives some advice as to how we could get inflation down, she gets abused by Treasurer Jim Chalmers. And that's why families are really hurting at the moment.
Right? So this is becoming a bigger and more major problem. Now, let's head over to America. Now, we told you the day of the Biden selection, we told you it was a selection and that Biden needs to be put in place. What did we say in our first video? With Biden's selection, housing set to double, even in rural parts of America. Food set to double and triple, and we're going to go into energy wars with the Biden selection. And what's happened since Biden got selected? Well, The price of housing has doubled and tripled in a lot of parts. And more people are waking up to what's been happening in Canada since 2010, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. So people are in America now with the Biden selection have woken up to what we've been facing here in the Commonwealth. They have waken up to Amerifornia. And it's something I've been calling Wagons East Amerifornia, where America becomes California.
See, I told you, it wasn't such an easy video to put together to show you who's actually in command here and what problem that you have when you were warned by the Queen. You shall know them by their rainbows. You shall know them by their rainbows. You shall know them by their wokeism and their communism. You shall know them by the Nazi-style actions they progress with from here. You shall know them as the debt collector. Release the Kraken, I think the wording is in the Greek mythology. And the only one that stood there was Perseus in his little Argos, remember? And he slayed the heads off that money machine, didn't he? And in the Bible it was the Vale of Siddim, because you joined the evil and collapsed with the evil and collapsed out of memory, lest ye forget, right? Lest ye forget to anchor home and stand in those rough seas, like Peter said. Don't worry about those waters, we'll calm them for you. We'll say, God is the line of authority in the Constitution, and we'll show the money men for who they are. Isn't that what God said? Peter would let those seas calm, as we pointed out all the crimes and human trafficking and slavery and torture in those torture facilities. Remember, Sky News called them torture facilities. I wonder why all of this use of words happens in the medium we call propaganda, the TV. The TV always tells the truth, doesn't it? Or does it just skip across the top of the truth? Because it's obligated to say something true, but maybe hold lots of the truth from you. Here's a tidbit, little child. Does that keep your appetite happy? Do you want to know more? Reminds me of that Starship Troopers. Would you like to know more? Citizenship. Citizenship for freedom. Citizenship for what? Abraham Lincoln's slavery machine that dragged us into this hole we're all in right now because everyone forgot how to anchor with God. That's an interesting thought as we close off on this video. It's been a wonderful journey today. It's been a difficult edit, I will tell you that. So, bank accounts, I've updated the support page in the link because someone pointed that out. And thank you very much for all of your help. Now, use this law. Go into those police stations and dob them in. And keep a record of this, like Justice Lonergan said, and then use that record and pass it on to your politicians in your electorate. Because they only want to hear from you in your electorate. We can't discuss legal implications of them under oath if we're not in their electorate. So go and put pressure on all of their heels to abide by the rules of engagement that they brought here and put on the table with their little pew-pew ships that sailed past pillars of rocks.
It was there. It was there. The information was there for you to see. And now, with controlled information distribution, the select influencers on all the platforms are coming out and telling you where we're at and blaming the governments for this, which they're at fault for, of course, because they're getting too involved in our lives and want to regulate everything. And when they regulate and touch anything, it turns to crap. You know this. So now here we are. You can't afford to buy food. And everyone stop picking on the Chinese. But what if our governments are China? Has that ever occurred to you? Oh, we sold all our jobs out to China, now they're coming back to buy us out. But what if those people that sold our jobs out to China were China?
So as we close off for the day, this is now becoming a legal matter, isn't it? Knowledge of what they've done to you from the standing of who they are and the links that get you to who they are have brought rules on the table that you find in the Criminal Code 1995. Start using them. Learn how to charge them with civil and criminal offences. Gather together in your community locally and start pushing that through members of your community. Do you want to clean up house? Do you want criminal agents working around you as this administration? Would you like to work towards removing administration? Would you like to look towards jailing and putting before courtrooms those offenders as according to law, as the Australian Federal Police are obligated to uphold? Well, now's your chance. You've been playing get out of fine game instead of standing up for yourselves as a people and pointing the finger at a bunch of war criminals and people that have defrauded administration. So all the help we can get from now on will support us to help you, and then we should all go forward with our claims before the police, the councils, the state and the federal government. Rein them in. Literally, rein the horse in. Rein the unicorn in. And you'll win.